defined as the steps teachers take to support learners so that they can understand new content and develop new skills. And scaffolding can be provided for the four skills and can be used to give students the boost that they need to form new ideas or learn new language. And let's talk about the history behind scaffolding. Scaffolding theory was first developed by the psychologist Jerome Bruner, and he used it to describe the interactional and instructional relationship between adults and children. And Bruner recognized that adults help children to solve problems that may be beyond what they can do alone. So, for example, a mother helping and encouraging her child to make a cake. This is a real world example of scaffolding in action. And some researchers understand scaffolding as having roots in social cultural theory, specifically with respect to Vygotsky's concept of ZPD, or the zone of proximal development. And Vygotsky said, what a child can do with support today, he or she can do alone tomorrow. On the one side, we have what students can do, their current knowledge and skills. And here they may be stable, but they also may feel bored and unchallenged. And on the other side, we have what students can't do, what's beyond their current reach. And here they may feel anxious or frustrated. And between these two, we have ZPD, where the students feel challenged, excited, and engaged. So how do we help students go from their current knowledge and skills to just beyond those that they can reach alone? Well, that's by supporting them with scaffolding. So scaffolding is used to help students move into their ZPD, ideally right to the edge of what they cannot do. In terms of scaffolding strategies, there are many different types and templates. Researchers tend to organize these strategies into three groups: reception scaffolds, transformation scaffolds, and production scaffolds. And these groups are not mutually exclusive, and there may be some amount of overlap. But let's talk about them. So reception scaffolds. Reception scaffolds help learners at the presentation or the input stage to gather and organize information about content and language. So some examples of reception scaffolds are, mind maps, partially completed timelines or storyboards, and graphic organizers like Freyer model diagrams. And reception scaffolds can even start at the pre-task stage. So let's look at some examples. So graphic organizers are, of course, also a common way to scaffold for content and language input. Here's an example of a Freyer model diagram template. And you have the word in the middle, and the definition and characteristics on the top, and examples and non-examples on the bottom. And these along with storyboards and timelines can be partially completed, or if there's time, you can even have the students find their own examples or find the word itself. Information grids also can help collect and organize information. Here's an example from one biology lesson about dinosaurs. Students can search the internet for the relevant information, for example, about paintings in an art lesson. And generally speaking, reception scaffolds help make input more efficient, but they may only require the lower order thinking skills, or LOTS. Transformation scaffolds help learners at the processing or the thinking stage to change information into another form. And this requires HOTS, such as analyzing and evaluation. And examples include Venn diagrams and comparison matrices. In an art lesson, for example, students may compare paintings, and Venn diagrams are useful for having students analyze similarities and differences. Or in a lesson on environmental issues, for example, students can evaluate arguments for whether global warming is man-made. A simple comparison matrix can help categorize information, for example, in an elementary school lesson about sports. Or here, for example, a comparison matrix offers support for a junior high school biology lesson to categorize and compare the differences between small animals. And the third and final type of production or of scaffolding is called production scaffolds. And production scaffolds offer support at the output stage, right? So in tasks where learners produce or create something new, for instance, an essay or a debate. And this type of scaffolding is geared towards helping students with expression. And some common examples are writing or speaking frameworks and sentence starters. Here's an example of a writing or speaking framework for an art lesson. Again, scaffolding can target content or language or both. In this example, they're paired quite well together. Students may need the right question to push them to think further about the content, or they may need a sentence starter to help them express themselves in the target language. For speaking in particular, learners may be shy or lack the necessary vocabulary, which would result in them avoiding using the target language entirely, right? So it may be helpful to write some sentence starters on the whiteboard or blackboard, for example, listing out some useful expressions in preparation for a class debate. And there's always the question of what degree of scaffolding is appropriate. And this will, of course, depend on your learners, but it's up to you to find the student's ZPD and determine the appropriate balance. So scaffolding is provided to avoid sink or swim, where the students will likely drown without any extra support whatsoever. But scaffolding is also, it's not spoon feeding, right? It's important to remember that the end goal should be student autonomy. Scaffolding should decrease or ideally disappear entirely once the students are able to do it on their own. And we should treat scaffolding like literal scaffolding. It's temporary, right? And eventually it comes down to reveal the beautiful building standing by itself. And that's also one of the benefits of doing, the same types of tasks more than once, is because the second time you do, for example, a class debate, the students shouldn't need the sentence starters, right? And it's not useful to try to scaffold everything. There isn't time for teachers to prepare that much, or for students to use that many scaffolds. So please choose them carefully. I try to invoke the Pareto principle here. So you want to choose the 20% that solves 80% of your problems. Okay, now let's move on to our next topic very quickly, which is related to scaffolding, which is translanguaging.
Okay, Nate, we do have 5 minutes remaining until 7:30. So just to give everyone that little update there. Will we be taking questions at the end, or?
I just discussed that with Brick and we decided not to, so.
Okay, so if you had written a question, if you would, well, Nate is going to also introduce his website where you can get in contact with him. So if you have asked questions, you could actually contact him directly after the session. So I will let Nate go on and finish his presentation. Sorry about that, Nate. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so if we had time, sorry, I would have loved to discuss translanguaging in the breakout rooms as well, but I want to quickly try to cover this last concept because it's becoming popular and it's very important in CLIL. So according to the theory, so translanguaging is the process of meaning making, shaping experiences, or gaining understanding and knowledge through the use of two languages. And there's something called universal translanguaging, but for the purposes of this session, what we're talking about is classroom translanguaging. And classroom translanguaging has been defined as the planned and systematic use of two languages inside the same lesson by specifying and varying languages of input, processing, and output. Okay, and it should be noted that translanguage is distinct from code switching. We don't have to get into it, but yes, it's not the same as code switching because it views languages as one integrated system. And we're trying to use, it's the strategic use of both languages for the specific purpose of the maximization of learning. Not all the time in code switching is, the L1 is not used necessarily to develop the second language. So what about these, English only policies or English in principle policies that we've heard about in Japan? Aren't we trying to keep all of our lessons in English all the time? Well, I think Patsy Lightbrown gives a good reason for translanguaging and including the student's first language in the classroom. And she says that the most valuable learning tool that children have is the language they already know. So of course we want to expose our students to the target language as much as possible, but it would be foolish to ignore their first language. It's a powerful resource, right? And there are many functional uses of the L1 in CLIL. So some of the common examples, for instance, pedagogical functions of it saves time, right? Metalinguistic functions, for example, comparing the L1 and the L2, or could be for rapport building with students, and importantly, cognitive functions such as promoting deep thinking and reflection about the content. And there are two types of translanguaging, planned and unplanned. So unplanned is ad hoc or serendipitous, right? It's provided by the teachers or the peers at a moment of need, and it's done to support, meaning making. Whereas planned translanguaging is already included in the lesson plan. And this is designed in a way to scaffold the content or the language or both. So what does that look like in practice? So here are some common examples of translanguaging tasks. So first, let's talk about translanguaging from English to Japanese. So for example, reading a text or watching a video in English and taking notes and summarizing in Japanese, or collecting information in English and then having a discussion or giving a presentation in Japanese. Or from Japanese to English, for example, making an outline in Japanese and writing an essay in English, or having a discussion or group discussion in Japanese and then sharing the main points with the whole class in English. And we can also see examples in terms of the PPP or presentation, processing, and production that I mentioned. So for example, read or listen to a text in English and discuss the meaning in either language, and then present the discussion in English. We can use translanguaging to scaffold for reading outcomes. For example, read a text in Japanese and use a graphic organizer like a Venn diagram in English, and then use the graphic organizer to write an essay in English. And this has the bonus of improving the students' note-taking skills, and also it limits the possibility of copying. And this is particularly useful, I think, for a history lesson. So students can read first read the text in about the same event in both English and Japanese, and then they complete a Venn diagram comparing the two texts, and then they write a compare and contrast essay. And this is, I think, a great opportunity to develop students' critical thinking skills. Yes. So actually, Kentaro Koibuchi, one of my colleagues at Sophia University, he actually did this or something similar to this for one of his high school lessons. And he found a history textbook that was used in the United States in high school history classes, and compared it with the students' Japanese history textbooks. And they found passages that described the same event, such as the battle for Okinawa and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And from what Kentaro told me, the students found some interesting similarities and differences. They also reported that it helped them think critically. So overall, the lesson goes from L1 input, activating the students' background knowledge in Japanese, to L2 input, reading the authentic text in English, and then to L1 output. So using the HOTS, for example, the analyzing and evaluating in group discussions in Japanese, to finally L2 output, making group presentations in English on the differences. And I thought this was a great example of how translanguaging can be used effectively in CLIL lessons. So as a final note, I want to reiterate that translanguaging is not simply translation. It should be done intentionally and strategically to maximize the students' learning. And similarly, scaffolding is not the same as help, right? The end goal should be student autonomy, and scaffolding should decrease or disappear once students are able to do it on their own. So that concludes this session. So as part of my PhD research now, I'm working to help teachers to implement CLIL into their own team taught lessons. So I created the website ttclil.com. And on the website, you can find more information about the topics discussed in this session and other CLIL topics that we didn't have time to discuss. And if you happen to be a team teacher and you are feeling particularly inspired to try a CLIL approach, please click on the top right button and consider joining the Team Taught CLIL project. In conclusion, I want to leave you with one last word of advice from David Marsh, who's the scholar that's credited for coining the term CLIL. And he said that I've seen teachers burn out because of the effort they put into planning. So it's important to start slow, to take small steps and work in a team. And I know CLIL can seem complex and overwhelming, but just start with one activity at a time and start implementing more when you're ready for it. So thanks so much for listening. You can reach me at my email on the screen, nate@ttclil.com, if you have any questions or comments. And thanks again to John and Jolt Hokkaido for putting on this presentation. I was very glad to do it, and I hope it was helpful for all of you too.
Very informative, even enlightening, I think. And the discussions went on very well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This presentation workshop was recorded, and we will upload that to our Jolt Hokkaido website.